Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Walther from Oak Wealth Advisors, and with me tonight are Meghan Burke from the University of Illinois and Sickon from the Center for Independent Futures. And we could not be happier to be hosting you all tonight for what we hope will be an innovative way of learning. We expect to learn as much from you tonight as hopefully you'll learn from us. That's why we created the town hall environment. We really want to have as few slides as possible and actually engage you in question and answer for the majority of the night. So at your seat, you should have found some note cards. If you wish to ask a question anonymously, you're welcome to do that. We can pick those up during the session and get those addressed for you. Because we are filming this. Some folks couldn't join us tonight. We want to make this information available to them as well. The other documents you have, we have an evaluation form. We hope this is not the last night we get together. If there's other topics that are of interest to you that we don't cover tonight, let us know what those are. We'll try to reconvene and get those covered as well. You'll see the handouts. All the slides will be replicated there for you. And then you also have some additional handouts from each of us. Rather than put tons and tons of data on the PowerPoint slides, we thought we'd give you some handouts we can then reference while we're talking about the different topics. So does everyone have those handouts? Did you find everything at your seat?
Yes.
Good. Glad to hear that. There's refreshments in the back. Feel free to get up and get those if you need them. The restrooms are down the hallway. And with that, I'll turn it over to Meghan to start the presentation.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. Let's see. Well, you just introduced us, so I'll keep going. So we're here to talk about future planning, and as you probably already know, individuals with disabilities are having longer lives, and they're starting to outlive their parents, which is the first time that we're starting to see that happen. In my particular family situation, so I'm the oldest of 5. My brother Ryan is number 4 in line. Maybe you can tease him out of this picture of my giant family. But he's 25 and he has Down syndrome. So we're future planning for him and looking forward to fulfilling caregiving roles for him and supporting him in the future as that starts to arise. And then the picture on the right is a picture of my brother Ryan and my son Rogan, who also has a disability. So now I'm getting it from both angles, learning how to navigate the system for my own son and engage in future planning for him, while I'm also trying to look at transitioning into a caregiving role for Ryan. So I think it's just important to kind of share, like, personally understanding how hard this is and understanding that we have a very long way to go in terms of figuring out how to make this easier.
I'm Ann Sickon, and I also am an adult SIB. So I'm the oldest daughter in a family of 9, and number 5 for us, our middle sibling, my sister Jean, has special needs, and so I've grown up with Jean my whole life, and I also have a 22-year-old son who has special needs. So again, very much the same walk that Meghan's doing. Maybe I'm just a decade or 2 ahead of you there, but really, it's a very interesting perspective for all of us family members to be looking at. I'd like to get a quick feel, just because as we're talking tonight, I think it's helpful to know, for all of you who are in the here with us, how many of you have a son or daughter who's, you're here tonight on their behalf, but who's still in high school?
Wow. Okay.
And then how many would you say are, how many are here? Your loved one is in transition services, receiving some type of transition services. Okay, so they haven't turned 22 yet. They're still in that period of time for 22. And then how many of you here have loved ones who have already gone out of school and are living at home or in the community? Great, thank you, because that really helps us kind of get a better sense on how we look at some of the information we want to share. Up here behind me is probably something that, being in Illinois, is not news to most anybody who's here. But I think it's still important just to look at the fact that 63% of the people who are signed up and currently active on the PUNS list, right, prioritization of the urgency of needs, that's the list you get on to be able to identify whether you'll get support for services, get some type of funding for services. Right now, of those individuals, you've got over 12,000 people who are waiting within those age ranges to be receiving services, right? They don't currently have them. So I think that that's something for us as family members and as adult, and as just other individuals who are really vested in this issue in our state to be mindful of. And the other thing when you're looking at these numbers is that 27% of the caregivers, that individuals who are still living at home, they're 60 and older. So as you know, as we continue to see individuals not receiving funding, not having an opportunity to create a different life experience, at the same time, their caretakers are aging and aging. And so that's another crisis that we have to be thoughtful about, and when you're looking at future planning. The next one also that I just wanted to mention was, you know, how big is this problem? Well, the CDC last week just updated this first number. It's not 1 out of 5 now. They're now saying 1 out of 4 Americans can identify having a disability. Some of that is really due to our aging society, but still 1 out of 4 is a very large number. You know, when we're thinking about what that means as a society and as a community, and that lack of funding that we see for young people who are trying to start living into community is a huge obstacle. And what I just want to say is that as family members and as people who are interested, friends, people who just want to be engaged in this, we've got to be vocal. We've got to reach out. And vocal to me doesn't mean shouting. Vocal to me is being heard to your senators, your congressmen, our elected officials, our township personnel. Everyone really kind of has to take that on, because it's part of the future planning is to make this current situation improve.
Questions on transition? What are your biggest concerns? A lot of people in the room are going through the process now. What are the biggest fears and worries? Anybody? We're going to pass the microphones around too. We got 2 people to hopefully help us do that. I just want to capture your questions on tape. No questions about transition?
So I have a son who's turning 21 next month, or next week, sorry. So he has a year left in the transition program. So my concerns are just, filling his days. What's he going to do all day? I have a full-time job, and just, trying to kind of plan for that, plan for activities, as well as he really, really wants to live independently. So it's a goal of his, but I'm not sure that that's, a realistic goal.
Have you identified any local area, any supports within the area that would align with what he's looking to do?
Starting to do that now. I've gone to a couple of places.
You're mentioning the recordings being made. How can that be accessed by those not present?
So for those of you who are here and want to see it or have friends, we're going to be posting this on YouTube once it gets edited to make sure we look tan and beautiful, as well as very articulate. So anything we do that looks stupid, they'll edit that out. But once that gets edited, we'll be posting it, and we'll be sending out an email to all of you letting you know where you can get to it.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other transition questions before we move on to the next subject? Yes? No?
So we had conducted a national survey study with parents of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities looking at future planning, because there's not much research about future planning in general. And so we had almost 500 families participate in the study across the country, and found that most parents said they had engaged in what we call aspirational future planning, but few of them had engaged in definitive future planning activities. So if you go to this kind of paper that's in your packet, with the tables and the statistics, they're just primarily percentages. The first table, you'll see kind of the individual percentages or frequencies with which each future planning activity was conducted. So you'll see kind of at the top, a lot of people said, yeah, I located an attorney about disability issues, and we talked about it within my family. We have some idea about future planning, which is good that they are doing that, good that you're starting to communicate, although the numbers are still around 50%, so not all families are doing this. But it's not really a definitive future planning activity. It's not a concrete, tangible step toward future planning. Those are happening with a lot less frequency. And so you can see as you get down to the bottom, it's more like 25% of families who said, we've made actual residential plans, we've actually created a letter of intent, which is something that doesn't cost you anything, that kind of dictates what the person likes to do during the day, what medications they're on, what doctors they see. So if that something should happen, the person who was coming in to take over caregiving would know those things. Less than 25% of families had actually done that. And then even fewer had taken steps to secure a residential placement. So not quite the statistics that we would like to see. And then when we asked, well, what are the barriers to future planning? Why was this so hard? What are you struggling with? We had response options. So we had finances, lack of information time. It's really emotionally difficult to talk about. Inertia, it's easier to do nothing. I certainly appreciate that. And the family refuses to engage in future planning. And so those happen with quite a bit of frequency. You know, it's expensive to maybe find an attorney to help you. It's expensive maybe to find housing. It's expensive to kind of figure those things out. It's hard to navigate adult services. These are things that you're probably familiar with. But we also had an other option to allow people to write in. And usually in survey research, people don't write in anything. But this one they did. And it was really our fault for not thinking to make this a response option. And 61% of people actually wrote in and said, I'm not planning because there are no services to plan for. And why would I bother planning for something that there's no supports to actually carry it out? And so we actually had this study. It went out in a big media release about a year ago, I think. And I had several parents from across the country contact me and say this is exactly why they have not engaged in future planning. This is exactly what is happening to them within their own families. So this is a huge issue, and obviously an issue in Illinois with the PUNS list, and looking forward to how can you actually implement the plan that you want for your family member.
Well, the good news is that as far as addressing the information piece, you all are here tonight. So I would give you a thumbs up for that. My guess is this is not the only presentation you'll attend in your lifetime. So by seeking that information, by going out and finding the experts who will share answers with you, you're getting through that first barrier. And the other two barriers that have been mentioned by Meghan in the research are two that our firm addresses pretty regularly. And in fact, we came up with this list behind me. These are what we consider to be the 7 elements that every family has to address. In some circumstances, they may not apply. We think if you at least discuss them and think about the fit for your family's needs, and you get through these 7, you'll have a really good base from which to assist your loved one with special needs. And to quickly go through these, and again, this could be a 90-minute presentation just in this slide, and if we don't get more questions, we will do that. So I encourage your question about any of this. But the first one's public benefits. Many of you have probably been to presentations, you understand what kinds of public benefits should be available, and what it takes to qualify for those, and what the unfortunate limitations are if you want to keep those benefits in place. So that by itself is a big challenge for many families. Yet the public benefits are an incredible lifetime resource. We want all the families that are here to at least avail themselves of and do the best they can to get those. The results of actually applying for SSI Medicaid are dreadful. The number of people that get turned down is staggering, but it's worth making the effort to get it for your loved one. On the ABLE accounts, a relatively new opportunity for folks. Some of you have been in the special needs community for decades, might not be aware this came on the scene in 2016. It's a tax-free savings account for anybody who has a disability prior to the onset of age 26. And there's actually legislation pending in Washington to push it out 20 more years. So a lot of our veterans who come back in their 20s and 30s can also access this kind of a tax-free savings account. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's new, and it's something you should consider as part of your planning. Special needs trusts. Can I just see by a show of hands how many people in the room have a special needs trust or are in the process of getting one for their loved one? Okay, it's about 3/4 of the room. That's great, maybe more than that. That, I think, is really the cornerstone of the planning. But by itself, it's not going to do anything, right? It's a document. It's a set of documents in most cases. And you want to have these in place so that you can maintain eligibility and also protect your loved one from the outside world. They can insulate and protect. They can provide professional resources in the form of a professional trustee if necessary. And they keep the child eligible for benefits regardless of the size of the assets in the special needs trust. So that's a really key thing that I'm glad most of you have already addressed. Beneficiary designations. This is one of the biggest mistakes we see our clients making when they come to visit us. They don't think about the fact that their will is going to control very little of their assets when they die. The beneficiary designations will. You have a beneficiary designation on your life insurance policies, you have them on your IRA accounts, and you have them on your company beneficiary plans. And in many cases, that's the bulk of the assets you'll be leaving to the next generation. And what your will says has nothing to do with where those assets are going to go. The beneficiary designation tied to those different things will dictate who is the beneficiary when you're gone. So it's important to review those and make sure that if you've got a loved one with special needs who you want to have benefit from those assets, that their trust and not them outright is named as a beneficiary. That way, no matter what the value of the asset is, they can keep their public benefits and have additional resources available to them. So proper planning with beneficiaries is absolutely essential. Then there's decision makers. Many of you I know are from Chicago. Anybody here live downstate or have relatives that live downstate? Nobody?
Just me.
Just you.
Okay.
So that would probably mean that none of you have a relative living in Metropolis, like the most famous Metropolis citizen, Superman.
Superman, yeah.
Right, Superman's the most famous one from Metropolis. Superman may be the only person that can serve all the roles of guardian, trustee, caregiver, and agent under power of attorney. And thus far, we've never met a family who has Superman as a relative. Yet almost all of our clients come in and they show us documents that name one or two family members to play all those roles. That's a tough ask. We'll be talking more about how you work with siblings and relatives in the planning, but to think that the eldest sibling in many cases is going to just do everything is probably a leap of faith that's not going to work out in the long run. So thinking about who those decision makers are going to be in your loved one's life and getting those names, not only in the estate planning documents, but also in the letter of intent that Meghan mentioned, that non-legal document that's so important, which is actually the next thing on our list. We call it a care guide, others call it a letter of intent. It's non-legal, so you don't have to go through an attorney to do it. There's numbers of free documents available online through different agencies, organizations. Our firm has one, you can use whatever you want. The key is to get all those nuances that are unique to your loved one documented so that if you don't leave on your terms and someone's going to step in quickly into your shoes, they know all those idiosyncrasies. Whether it's, if my son doesn't turn off his light when he goes to bed in his room at night, he's not going to sleep. That's a big problem. It might take someone a month to figure that out if they don't have it written down. What if there's a dietary thing that isn't obvious to someone that's causing them all kinds of health issues? Until they get to the right person to figure that out, you're going to have health issues to deal with and possibly other issues as well. So having all those things that are unique to your loved one written down someplace and then shared with those who might step in to provide the care is absolutely essential, which leads to the coordinated communication. We'll get into more of that tonight, but it's absolutely essential that you talk about this stuff. And by being here tonight, you're probably among the group that's going to be more communicative than the others. It's the folks who have their heads in the sand, like the ostrich, that terrify me. What's going to happen when those parents die? No one's going to know what's going on. That loved one's going to be just set adrift. But hopefully if you're communicating within your family about your planning and the loved one's needs, you'll be in better shape. So those are all the things you've got to be considering as a base. What questions do you guys have about that?
Okay, I'm going to be dead. I'm going to take a step back because now that we're talking about how we prepare for family, what comes back to my mind is transition. I think what is extremely hard and challenging for all parents is that every child with disability is completely different. And every person aspires to something different and needs something different. I think what's really hard is understanding what that future could look like. You know, you have a child with a disability and you paint a picture of the future, and that picture starts to change and evolve over time. That just never stops. And so, it's, you know, what I almost wish I had was, here's the range. This is all the things that the way your son could be serviced. You know, to me, the range was, you could go to Misericordia, or you could do something else. And all the options under something else were up to me to identify. There wasn't any kind of magic code or book. And so, yeah, I thought about all this, preparing my family for the future, but I didn't know what the future looked like and what those things should say. So that's where I think parents are really in need of help, is starting with the person and what does that person's future look like. The range.
Thanks. I think it's a really good point. And in fact, this group tonight and other groups you'll be affiliated with throughout your lives are really essential to making the right decisions for your family. You can go to attorneys, you can go to other advisors and get their answers, but bouncing it off of your peers, seeing what your neighbors who have had similar circumstances have done, successfully or unsuccessfully, and then thinking about what you want for your loved one is probably the best way to go about it. There are no right or wrong answers, but we would tell you in the planning side of things, as Dana mentioned, you want to create options. You don't want to go down one road that has no way to back up, because then you're stuck with a a solution. You want to try to create as many options as you can going forward, so if their desires change, their abilities change, their health changes, you can pivot and still have a wonderful life for that loved one in your family.
If I could just piggyback on that from a different perspective, when we talk about school transition plans, right? I think we, as a person who trains special ed teachers, they don't know what could go into a transition plan and how robust it could be, right? And so I've seen transition plans where the transition goal was get on the PUNS list. It's like, that's not a goal, and 20,000 other people are on the PUNS list. So it's actually like not helpful, right? And what I've seen in Boston, where they have really a lot of strong parent advocates, is they all share their IEPs, they share their transition plans, so you could see what other people have, and you could be like, that would be appropriate for my child, that would be appropriate for my child, because otherwise it is hard to figure out what could go in there, and really IDEA lets you put anything in there that your child needs, right? So that might be something else to think about. How can you really make this worthwhile? And when your child's in the last year of school, how can you make it so it's not babysitting and that you're actually doing something to prepare them for post-school outcomes?
And I would just go one step also and say it's not just about what the teachers know what's out there, but it's on families, it's on all of us to go out there and look at the different options. It really is about going out and looking at different opportunities, because we have to create and paint different pictures than what have been painted for us, right? And that takes some initiative and working and talking to other families who have created other options. Because, you know, I have the opportunity of working with families across the country who are creating those different, you know, living options, different opportunities for supports, and in so many different creative ways. And it's really families talking to families and looking at what's being done elsewhere will help us as family members paint those different pictures, that whole rainbow of pictures, and then see what our loved one is drawn towards. I agree. A lot of it's on us too.
Does anyone in the room have an example of an IEP experience, perhaps during the transition years, you want to share with the rest of the room who might be a couple years behind you that could help them through transition? Anybody have any aha moments that were really beneficial for your loved one? Anybody? A lot of bright minds in the room, I know that. All right.
Yeah,
What's that?
lack thereof.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, and I think we see that a lot, but I think as they articulated, you want to really look at all the IEPs that are online, talk to friends, see what they've done, because again, don't just take what's given to you. You should be recommending things back to the school about things you want for your loved one, and it can be off the reservation entirely. If it's of interest to your loved one to go pursue something, document it and tell them why that's important for your family to have them do that. And then the school is going to hopefully try to provide that support to make that happen. But if you don't ask for it, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask for it, it's not going to happen. So be forceful, and if you need to take an advocate with you because you feel intimidated that it's maybe just you or you and a spouse going in against a table of 12 people who are all staring at you with a bunch of paper in front of them, it's an intimidating meeting, right? It really is. It's intentionally done that way. Fight back. Let them know what you want for your kid. Okay? It's okay to do that. Yes, sir.
I have a grandson with special needs. I'm interested in setting up a trust to provide, you know, and to build over time. He's young, he's 6 years old right now. I don't know the difference between an ABLE account, special needs trust, and how it impacts on public benefits.
Okay. I'll try to answer this quickly because we don't want to spend the whole night on this slide, but that's a great question. The ABLE account and the special needs trust are both non-countable resources when the government's looking at what the individual's resources are. That's the most key element they have in common. So as you fund both of those kinds of accounts, the assets that accumulate there will not jeopardize their public benefits if they're receiving SSI and Medicaid, okay, the means-tested benefits. Now, currently under the law, the ABLE account cannot be over $100,000 in value. When it reaches that level, it will become a countable resource. But it's going to take a while with a $15,000 annual funding limit for an ABLE account to get to $100,000. And we hope that legislation will be passed between now and then to bump that limit up a little bit. The trust There's really two major kinds, one of which is funded by what we call other people's money. Your money in your example for your grandson. His parents' money could go into that. And that self-settled trust would be his own money. The thing that self-settled trust has in common with the ABLE account is if there's resources remaining in those accounts when the person passes away, the government is entitled to be reimbursed for Medicaid services received during their lifetime to the extent there's money in the self-settled trust or the ABLE account. The trust will be more limited in what it can make distributions for. The ABLE account has more flexibility. Another difference is that the trust has a trustee. The trustee has what's called sole discretion. That's the key element for a special needs trust. The trustee is the only person who can make a determination of giving money out for any reason. The beneficiary can ask for it, but the trustee has to decide, is that appropriate and would it violate the terms of the trust? Whereas the ABLE account is much more like a checking account. It's in the individual's own name, and if they want to use it for an inappropriate purpose, they can do that, but then that could jeopardize their benefits if they use it for the wrong purpose. So an ABLE account probably requires someone with a higher level of functioning or someone who's going to have a guardian in place or someone else handling the funds for them, because there's greater risk with an ABLE account because the individual can control their own distributions.
In terms of limits, you said the ABLE was 100,000. Is there a limit on the special needs trust?
Okay, the question is, are there limits on the size of these accounts for the trust? So the ABLE account taps out at $100,000 if you want to keep means-tested benefits. If you're not receiving assigned Medicaid, the limit is actually tied to each state's College 529 plan limit. That's just the way it works. So in many cases, that's anywhere from $350,000 to $500,000 becomes your limit. So it's much larger. The trust can have an infinite amount of money in it. So there's no limit at all in the trust. So for larger inheritances, we want that going into a trust. For smaller gifts that might accumulate over time, an ABLE account's a wonderful resource for that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes?
Hi. You had mentioned earlier decision makers. What were, I know one decision maker after I'm gone would be the trustee of the Special Needs Trust. Could you enumerate what some of the other roles would be that would need to be divided and people I should be looking for?
Sure. The four main decision makers to consider for your family, and you may not need all these, would be a guardian, a trustee, an agent under a power of attorney, and a caregiver. And what we find to be ironic is that the person with the least amount of legal standing or power is the caregiver, who likely is going to have the most contact with your loved one in the future. But that's just the way the power distribution works. With an agent under a power of attorney, that person is granted the same rights as the individual, either with respect to healthcare and personal decisions, or with respect to financial decisions, or if they have both, they could actually have a power of attorney for both healthcare and for property, in which case they can assist the person with all decision making. But in that circumstance, with the power of attorney, the agent has the same rights, not greater rights. So if you're at a hospital, and let's say you have the power of attorney for healthcare, and your loved one is there, and the doctor says, we think getting these 4 shots that are going to hurt would be a good idea. And your loved one says, I don't think I want to get hurt, I'm not taking these shots. They trump you. It's an important thing to understand. But it would give you rights and access to their medical records, their financial records. You could sign a check for them. So the power of attorney is a wonderful thing to use if it's appropriate for your family. Now take another step further up. If you have guardianship, a guardianship is a transfer of rights. So a full guardianship would mean that the individual has no rights anymore. That's a big step to take, and in some circumstances it's appropriate. But in other cases, you're taking away everything for the individual. They couldn't get married, they wouldn't be able to drive a car, they can't have a contract with anybody for anything, and that might be more than you want to take away from them. But in some cases, it's doing it in their own best interest, in which case the guardian has those powers. The guardian makes all those decisions for the individual. And in Illinois, we have the ability to have a limited guardianship where you can specify certain things for which the guardianship applies and other things where it doesn't. So you can customize it a little bit if you get a good attorney that helps take you to court for that. The other thing to remember is that guardianship is the only one of these that actually requires a court appearance. You have to sit in front of a judge, and the judge will have to make the determination, yes, I grant this person guardianship. He might think, in that family, there's no one competent to be the guardian. That can be an embarrassing moment for your family. They might decide that, yes, that child needs a guardian, but it's not any of you. We're going to put the guardian ad litem. We're going to court appoint a guardian. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. Now your plan of having control just got given to someone else. Might not be the solution you want. And the last one, the trustee. The trustee might think they're all powerful, but the only thing the trustee is in charge of are the assets in the trust. So they don't make any healthcare decisions, don't make daily living decisions. They just manage the trust assets, hopefully make the correct distributions, and file all the proper forms. Okay, those are your 4 major decision makers.
I don't know how to phrase this, but I was at the meeting on Monday, and this whole thing of power of attorney came up. Is this kind of, I know power of attorney is not new, but from the get-go, we've been told legal guardianship, legal guardianship, legal guardianship, and I guess I really didn't understand it took away rights like if they want to get married, if they want to drive, if they want to vote. And so is now that becoming more of the recommendation to do power of attorney? Because you can always do legal guardianship, but once you do legal guardianship, it's hard to, is that correct? Am I understanding?
Yeah, I'll speak to that, and just that really across the country, the American Bar Association is really pushing for more supported decision-making is where you start your decision-making, right? And supported decision-making, there's a national association that you can go to get more information on it. But we've always done supported decision-making with my sister, and my sister has an IQ that ranks in the low 50s. So for her, I'm her legal medical person, and she's had major decisions that she's had to make that involved those areas. But because of my nursing and legal background, I'm able to take it and put it into words that I know help her understand the decision she wants to make. My other sister is a CPA. She takes all those big financial numbers, and she helps my sister understand how she wants to make a decision. So it really is about starting with supported decision making, then going to power of attorney, then going to guardianship. But it's interesting you say that, because when they do studies, and one of the articles that I was looking at recently, 80% of parents report that the first place they heard anything about power of attorney or supported decision making or guardianship was from educators. Yeah. It's the teachers in the schools, and they all just say guardianship because it's the only thing they know about. They don't know the rest, and so they tell parents that, and parents go out and get guardianship without really being fully aware of what the impact is across the board and the different opportunities that families and individuals have to discuss about what really is appropriate for each person.
I'm interested in learning more about public benefits other than SSI, Medicaid, or the food assistance program known as SNAP. Through networking, I have found 2 government benefits to my daughter, one of them being the National Park Pass that's free for life and does not need to be renewed. So through networking, I'm just wondering, from your experiences, are there other things that I'm missing? The other one is reduced fare permit for the city of Chicago and the surrounding suburbs for transportation. And again, I didn't hear about any of this from professionals. I did not hear about it from my daughter's school. I heard it through networking with other families. So I'm asking if you as professionals or if other families have heard of other public benefits available that are out there that are not need dependent on your finances, i.e. SSI or Medicaid.
One that I can think of for the North Shore, or at least for the New Trier Township, would be their community grants. And so that's something that you can go to the township and just pull off your community grant, the application, and it's for any individual with disabilities and or their family. The grants aren't great, but they're really pretty much focused to try to anybody who applies, they take the fund, whatever that fund is annually, and just divide it by the number of applications. I think last year it was around $1,000 per family, which may not sound like a lot, but it certainly covers some for respite or in some other uncovered services. So I do know the New Trier Township does that. You can check with your other townships, and often you'll find at other levels of government than just the federal or the state, your township level might also have some type of funds available.
There are a number of things, and a lot of times they say they're based on need, but the criteria is pretty loose. Reduced fare for cabs, reduced fare for all kinds of public transportation. My husband and I are very involved in adaptive recreation. You can go to almost any ski area and get a reduced fare pass for someone with a disability. Park districts offer scholarships for their special recreation programs. There's just a few I know of.
I think the Arc of Illinois offers a consumer stipend
Yes.
to attend conferences for families. And the Illinois Assistive Technology Project, they give devices on loan to families.
What was the first one?
The Arc of Illinois. ARC, A-R-C.
Again, I think this is a situation where going to events like this and continuing to talk amongst members in the community, whether it's through social media or elsewhere, you're going to find those little tidbits that are really helpful and appropriate for your specific loved one that you're going to have to uncover. They're not going to be in the literature. They're not going to be broadly discussed. But you never know where they turn up. And in fact, the Illinois communities are really blessed with the special recreation associations. It was where it started nationally. And so if you've got a loved one who wants to do social activities or athletic activities, there are all kinds of programs through the park districts. In fact, we're in a park district building tonight, so thank you to Glencoe for making this available to us. Seek those out, and if your family qualifies financially, you can attend those programs for free. So again, it's another great resource we have, somewhat uniquely here, that much of the rest of the country, wishes they had.
There's also the Early Intervention Clearinghouse. Even though it says early intervention in the name, it's the statewide lending library for families. So it provides books, ebooks, audiobooks, DVDs, assessment kits, journal articles for free that we'll ship to you, anything that you want. And if we don't have a book that you're looking for, we'll purchase it and send it to you. And then when you're done with it, you just drop it off at your local library and it gets shipped back to us. So that might be another thing.
So just there in the last 5 minutes, we uncovered probably 15 more things that you don't typically see in a presentation that are available if you seek them out. And again, we encourage you to keep doing that. That's what this is all about, is finding those options and creating opportunities.
No, question?
Mike, the last two items under 7, the care guide and coordinated communication, is letter of intent the same as care guide?
Yes, so the question up front, I don't know if it got captured, was, is a letter of intent the same as a care guide? And the answer is yes. One of the challenges in the special needs community is the language. You guys probably encounter that quite a bit, where the same thing has multiple names. Special needs trust is the same as a supplemental needs trust. But you'll hear those two words used interchangeably, and that's the core planning piece. Same thing here, a letter of intent, a care guide. I know a planner down in Georgia calls it the gift. I don't care what you call it, it's just a list of details about your loved one that someone else isn't going to know unless you document it. And however you document it is up to you. We actually recommend with that document that you do it electronically, because if there's one paper document, someone has to find that. If you do it electronically, you can share it with multiple people, update it more easily, and hopefully if that time of need comes to arise for your family, the people who need to know the information have it available to them. All right. Microphone.
How about if you need to make your house more accessible? Is there any financial help out there for that? Or is that something you just have to, if you need to widen the doorways and build a ramp or things like that to make it more livable?
I know that different communities and different cities have created funds. Often it's directed more towards a commercial entity to make sure that the door to the business is accessible. But there's also been funds in different townships and different cities that have been set aside to be assistive. I know, again, and I'm somewhat familiar with the New Trier Township, but I know that they've had funds that they set aside that individuals can go to their township and say, listen, we need some assistance with this unexpected expense for a medical reason or something like for accessibility. And they have funds set aside. So I think it's really on a one-on-one type basis. You should call your city, your local government, and inquire.
Okay.
There's nothing about the state.
Nothing.
I don't think so, but you might also want to contact the Family Resource Center on Disabilities. They're a parent training and information center, so they provide usually special education assistance to help you learn your rights, navigate special ed and school services, but they also provide referrals, so they would look into see if there are state resources available for something like that for you.
You just call the Family Resource Center?
Yeah, their phone number is 312-939-3513.
Say the last one.
939-3513. I used to work there, but I get no benefit from telling you that.
So I was wondering if there's any like additional resources for like job coaching. So my son right now is, he's at the transition center, and he does have, like a part-time job, but he's there with, pretty much like a full-time job coach through the school district. So I didn't know if you had any.
Have you done
tips
anything
there?
with Voc Rehab?
Yeah.
Is that?
Doors or ORs, I don't know what they're calling themselves now. Office of Rehab Services?
Yeah, a little bit, but yeah.
They changed their name. I'm not sure why. Yeah.
Because he's still in school, it's all, kind of offered through the school, so I didn't know if that was the only option, the DRS. I mean, that's,
But that should be able to follow him when he leaves school too.
okay.
And they could be involved now.
Yeah, and they sort of are, but
Yeah.
not.
I think like with everything else, it just takes a lot of advocacy to make sure they're
Right.
involved.
Yeah, right.
They're-
That's what I've heard, so
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was something else.
Thank you.
Should we keep going?
Fire away.
All right. Okay, so also in the same survey of parents of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we asked in the future, who's kind of your successor caregiver? Who do you think will take over that caregiving role? And it's interesting because in my family, there's 5 of us. And if you ask each of us individually who will be Ryan's caregiver, we would each say that we were going to do it. I would say I'm going to do it. My sister Jessica would say she was going to do it. My brother Shane would say he was going to do it. Amy's the baby. She might not say she would do it. But most of us would say we would do it, and we would say that's what Ryan wants. And so one day I asked Ryan what he wanted, and he said he wanted to live in an apartment in New York City by himself. And so we have a whole other study looking at how siblings don't always agree, right? So in this particular study, we asked parents. In our sibling studies, about 50 to 60% of siblings say usually they're going to be the future caregiver. Parents in this particular study, about 40% of them said their other child without a disability was going to be a caregiver, so the sibling. So somewhat similar, but not quite the match that we're looking for. 11.8% named another family member. 7.9% said caregiving wasn't necessary. But most importantly, 41.8% didn't like any of our response options, and again, wrote in other. And specifically, and probably most alarmingly, they wrote in, I don't know who's going to be the caregiver, or they wrote in the state is going to be the caregiver, which I can't think of any state that I would want to be the caregiver for Ryan. Definitely not Illinois. Well, probably shouldn't have said that since it's taped. But so a little concerning. We then conducted a different study looking at family communication. So this is a study between parents and siblings, about 10 parent-sibling dyads. We asked them questions about future planning activities. And that's in the kind of table 2 that's on this sheet here. And so just within this really small sample, we looked and we saw that they primarily did not agree about whether or not future planning activities were conducted. So agreement was about 59%. And if you look at this, you can kind of see, just for one parent-sibling dyad, the extent of agreement. And it's kind of concerning in that some of these things are like definitive future planning activities. I mean, it's pretty clear. You've either done this or you haven't, and they still disagreed about whether or not it was done. So for example, located an attorney to talk about future planning. The parent said, yes, we did. Sibling said, no, we haven't done that yet. The sibling didn't know quite a few of the answers. Towards the end, discussed the future plans with the individual with a disability. The parent said no, the sibling said yes. Right? So a little concerning, and also pointing in this direction of it's not just that there are not services out there and that funding is an issue and that adult services are really hard to navigate, but also this issue that actually is malleable and something we could address is family communication and making sure that we're all on the same page about future planning.
Go ahead.
From your experience with your parents, what age did they start talking to you about Ryan and what his care would look like and that you guys would be responsible?
Yeah, I think she only had that conversation with me, my mom. and
the oldest daughter.
Yeah, I'm the oldest daughter. It always falls on the oldest daughter. And it was early on. It was when I was in college. Where it was kind of made clear that that was going to be my responsibility. My sister Amy is in college now. She's the baby. And that's why I thought of it. She's the baby, and she had just said to my mom a few months ago, what's going to happen when you pass away, and am I expected to caregive for Ryan? And my mom was like, no, it's going to be Meghan. So it just made me think of that. But it was in college, but I think I've known for a lot longer that that was kind of the expectation.
I would suggest that the Burke family is the exception, not the rule. I think unfortunately most parents don't have these kinds of deep discussions with their kids and kind of have that plan that so-and-so will do it and so-and-so won't. And then someone passes away and the family's got to step in and do it. So the importance of having that communication be proactive and not reactive is so important. And I did mention earlier on that, like these two, I also have a sibling. My brother turns 50 this year, and in his 30s he was diagnosed with autism. Because when he was born, that wasn't a thing. He had developmental delays, he had significant disabilities, and when he was 2, he was told he'd never walk or talk. My parents, much like all of you, said, that's not good enough for us. And I'm proud to say that he's worked in the St. Louis County Public Library now for 19 years and loves his job, has a pretty wonderful life. And we joke about the fact that between the two of us, one has a 5-day-a-week job with not a lot of stress, gets to watch golf tournaments all weekend, gets 3 to 4 square meals a day, and has a pretty wonderful life. The other one of us doesn't have autism. But I will tell you, I've got a pretty good life too, and I'm really happy with what I do. But to let you know, no matter what the disability challenge your family faces, there's going to be an opportunity for some wonderful things in the future for them. And a lot of it comes from the communication. In our family, I'm the only brother, right? I'm the only sibling my brother Sean has. So by default, my parents figured it'd be me. And they felt really guilty about it. So for decades, they're apologizing about that. I said, well, fortunately, I've chosen a career path where I've got some knowledge and information. I can probably do a decent job with some of these tasks. But as I mentioned before, with all those different titles of caregiver, guardian, trustee, there's no way I can do all of that. But I've got a great network around me that I can farm things out to and allocate some resources and really surround him with the care he needs. But that only happens when there's communication, both within the family, in the immediate family setting at home, as well as the relatives. We've got lots of examples where the best meaning relatives completely screw up all the good planning you're doing. You go out there, you spend $5,000 with the attorney, you set up the special needs trust, you've got the ABLE account, you've got the public benefits. Thumbs up, you've cleared out all 7 things on my checklist earlier. Then Aunt Susie dies and drops $100,000 on your kid in his name outright. Thanks, Aunt Susie. Would have been great if I went to the special needs trust. Aunt Susie didn't know about that. Why? Because you didn't tell Aunt Susie about the special needs trust. So if you're willing to have those conversations with the broader family, especially where there's the potential for a gift to come, you can really avoid those kinds of unintended consequences that occurred due to a lack of communication. And that's one of the biggest things that we think families need to do as far as explaining their planning beyond the immediate family at home. The other thing is, when you're thinking about who those people might be to play a role, all of us are going to play a role in our siblings' lives in the future when our parents pass away. Not all of you have multiple children. You might only have one who has a disability, in which case there is no sibling to turn to. So the question is there some other relative that you're planning on having play a role? Are there agencies or professionals you have in mind for that? Chances are you do, because you probably created estate documents and named those folks. Now ask yourself this question. You name that person in your estate documents. Have you told them you named them? In our experience, 90% of families have never told the person they've named in their estate documents that if so-and-so passes away, we're planning on you stepping in. So the obvious problem is, what if they decline to serve? What if they don't know how to serve? A lot of assumptions are made on paper. Have that discussion. Share the care guide or letter of intent. Talk about why you chose them. Let them tell you no. When do you want them to decline to serve? Now or when you're dead? I would suggest it would be an easier thing to fix if they tell you now. So it's really important to discuss with other caregivers you have in the plan what you expect them to do. And we think about the old airline, TWA. They have to have the time, willingness, and ability to serve. Not easy to find that all in an individual, but you really need to seek that out if you're going to name them for one of those roles of being either the agent under a power of attorney or a guardian. Those are major tasks. And then also, if you're going to name a professional institution to be maybe a trustee or even a professional guardian, build that relationship now. Let them meet the family member. Let them create that contact so that when that time comes, they're more easily able to step into the role. Okay? And then the last thing, and this is a tough one to talk about, but a lot of times there's awkwardness at family gatherings when there's a special needs loved one involved. And I'll share my own family story. Every year on the holidays, my family, when we were younger, would always host a Christmas Eve party. And when we were young kids, it was easy. My brother would be talked to like a little child. But we all got older. And then it became more challenging for my relatives to know how to address my brother. They'd known him for years, but do you still talk to him like he's 3 and 4? Or do you talk to him like he's an adult? And in every family, the circumstances are different about what you want, for how you want your loved one to be addressed. But how many of you have actually taken the time to talk to your relatives about that? It'll make it easier for them and for your loved one if everyone's in the same playing field and knows what should be done. How should they be talked to? Should they be talked down to? Or should they be talked to as a peer? And I think having that discussion makes them more comfortable when they come over to your house for those family gatherings, that they know how to address everyone in the room. So that's something I wanted to share with you, that it made it easier once we had those discussions within our family. So questions around communication. Success stories you guys have had. Or if you want to share disasters too, we won't put names to this. Anybody? You guys have all got it figured out? That's awesome. That's why we invited you here tonight, because we knew you had those answers. Okay.
So the next study, and I think this is the last one, is a study that we had looking at natural supports. So we spend a lot of time talking about formal services and supports. In Illinois, we specifically spend a lot of time talking about PUNs and the waiting list, and once you get off the waiting list, that is your lottery ticket, and that is what you are waiting for. But across the United States, only 25% of individuals with disabilities are receiving formal services, which means that 75% of people with disabilities are not receiving any formal disability services. In fact, 43 states have waiting lists for services. Now, we happen to have one of the longest ones, but it's very common to be able to have to rely on natural supports. And so there's not much research to understand what are these natural supports, what do they look like, how do you access them, who's providing them, and that was kind of the purpose of this particular study. And the first thing that we found is that actually the people who had formal services and supports, the people who were receiving Medicaid waivers, a housing voucher from like Section 8, SSI or SSDI, were actually more likely to have natural support, which just goes to show you that once you do receive one of those sought after formal services or supports, like the game is not over, you're also looking for those natural supports to kind of complement them and to round them out. And specifically, those natural supports were to access recreation, employment, and housing.
We just wanted to put up here, and this is the ARC that we were referencing earlier. But the National ARC policy statement really focuses on the focus that everyone, anyone, whether you have a disability or not, but certainly anyone with a disability, regardless of what that disability is, they deserve the opportunity to be able to live, work, play, be a full life in the community. That is the position of the ARC. And with that, you have to start thinking about how do we make those possibilities exist for our loved ones. They also go on to talk about the individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities need varying degrees of support to reach personal goals and establish a sense of satisfaction with their lives. What we know is that when we're working with families, it really is about creating a circle of support. It's about creating people that, and for us as family members, we're sometimes very hesitant to ask a neighbor or ask a family member. It's, you become very vulnerable when you do an ask like that. If they would be willing to be part of a plan to help your loved one be able to access and live in the community. What you will find is that there's a lot of people that know your son or know your daughter, and when they're asked, they're happy to be part of a natural support group. But it's doing that ask, and the other critical thing, and this really comes from Plan America, Plan Institute in Canada, is the focus that when you ask people to be part of that circle of natural support, they found the greatest frequency of people who were involved stepping out or saying, I just can't do this anymore, when there weren't enough people in the circle. You're not going to really find a neighbor who wants to step in and feel suddenly like they are totally responsible for the entire the success of someone's social life. But they will be willing to be someone that helps support going to church or going to the synagogue or going to a community activity in which they also have an interest in. They're willing to do that and with support. But you have to be thoughtful about who you approach. And we also have something that we work with a lot, and I've got something you can get on our website. We have a lot of free resources for families, but one is called the Community Connector Bridge Builder Program. And that really is about helping individuals identify what do they want to do. What is it that your son and daughter love? What do they love? Do they love biking? Do they love art? What is it that they love that they could do in their community, like any of us can do in our community, but they don't feel comfortable, or they need some support, being able to maybe walk through that door. We all need that support sometimes. It's uncomfortable to walk into a social environment where you don't know anyone. It's the first time you're going there. Really, when you start building your support circle, that person can help, that bridge builder helps introduce the adult with disabilities to that community activity and stays with them. We call it aid and fade. They're not going to be joined at the hip forever, but they help introduce them. So you start building more natural supports so that your son or daughter doesn't necessarily have to be in a program, because none of us are in programs every day. We kind of choose what we want to do on a daily basis based upon our own interests and passions. How do we build those natural supports to help them be part of the community and be engaging that way? It requires work, it requires time, it requires intentionality, and it also requires that you allow yourself to be somewhat vulnerable. And I know for a lot of us as parents, we've lived through those moments when our daughter or son were faced with rejection or unkind comments, and so it sometimes makes us more hesitant to do that. But I will tell you, there are people in our communities that know our sons and daughters, that know your son and daughter, that would be willing to be part of that circle of natural support. The next thing also is including this inclusive community supports. That's what I was just referencing again, building those natural supports, nurturing community supports when you know someone in the community who is being supportive. I mean, I can think with growing up with my sister, there was one neighbor who just always was willing to be pleasant and have, always looked forward to my sister coming over and sitting on the front porch with her. I can guarantee you that neighbor got pastries every time we made them, whether they liked it or not, whether they wanted it or not. You nurture those relationships that you have in your communities. And then also just identifying overall support needs and financial resources, what are required and what are available. But I would really encourage everyone to be thinking about those community relationships and how we start looking at your community differently than the rushing through it. Start spending time when you're walking with your loved one around the community. Observe who knows them, who's already interacting with them, and you have no clue. I mean, a lot of us experience this. You go out in the community and everybody, hi, for me it's, hi Graham, hi Graham, hi Graham, hi Graham, hi Graham. And more people know him than have ever known me or addressed me. So it's kind of stopping and being mindful of that and starting to think about who is it in that sphere that really would care. The other thing that I think as far as for when you're looking at, what's going to be next, will also be inclusive housing. I mean, it's very, very scary when you think of the lack of housing. You hear about it in the papers, you hear about it in the news. When we were looking at those, the number of people who are waiting on the PUNS list, right? And it was over 12,000, right, between those ages, that age span. Over 9,000 people who are waiting on the PUNS list also say they need residential supports. So when you start thinking about what the demand and the need is, and you start looking at how much federal dollars have been cut back and restricted when it comes to creating more of those type of affordable housing options, our focus has been really working with families to create options within their community that are affordable and accessible for people to live in. And I think that, when we talk about natural supports, but of course, think about it. Could any funding source really provide all the services for 1 out of 4? I mean, when you start thinking about the number of individuals that are either from aging or individuals that we work with a lot with, someone who might have an intellectual and developmental disabilities, is there any funding source that could fully fund that? No, and let me say this, you don't want it to. Would any of us want to live our life where everything that's taken care of us comes from some other source? No, we want the richness of relationships. We want to know our neighbors. We want to be part of the community. And to be part of the community for many people, particularly with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's a matter of being able to find a place to live in the community. Because for many people, they aren't going to be driving. Some do, but many do not. So where they live will start driving what type of employment opportunities can they get to. Where they live starts driving the issues of accessibility to a grocery store, to healthcare, to all those things. So when you're thinking about, what does it take next when you start thinking of inclusive community, you've got to be thinking of all those additional aspects for housing. And it's, what is the walkability? What's the community like? What's the safety levels? And who else is in that community that is going to be supportive? And so I think after inclusive community considerations, then finally inclusive employment opportunities. And when the wonderful thing about a really tight labor market is that it opens the door often to more opportunities than when it's not so tight. But the number one way for people to be making friends, to be connecting, think about how many of your friends you've made through work, or you've made through a meaningful volunteer opportunity. because you have something in common now and you have an alignment. So when you're thinking about employment, our approach is always a person-centered one. We look at each individual and say, what are your gifts? What do you have to bring to the table today? And if you think about this, we all, I want to say it was, I think George Burns saying I had a lot more, I'd much rather be failing at something I love than doing really great at something I hate. You know, I look at my son and I think, I know there's a lot of things I ask him to do that are really hard for him to do. I look at my sister, there are certain things that have always been hard for her to do and will always be hard for her to do. But if you're doing something that you want to do, and that's true for all of us, and it's something we're interested in, and something that aligns with some of our gifts, we can work on the harder things also and be much more successful than if we're asking you to do something that's really hard and it's not even what you want to do. So you've got to start with what are your gifts, what are your interests, what are your passions, how does that align to an employment opportunity? And then you've got to work closely as families, as friends, you work closely to make sure natural supports are in place. We all use them. I have natural supports every day. You know, I mean, someone who always says, oh my gosh, she's doing that again, comes over and says, you keep pushing that button, it's really not going to make it go faster on the computer, Ann. But you know, they know me, right? They know there's times they have to just say, you've got to stop pushing that button. We all have natural supports. We all have people at work who work with us and recognize what our challenges are and help us. That's what we're also looking for, to create those type of natural supports when we're looking at employment opportunities. And again, DOORS or VRS, whatever they're calling themselves right now, other agencies, you know, that provide employment. There's a number of, you know, really excellent opportunities. And there's other really unique, you know, I think of Spirit Tech, you know, they're a fabulous employer for, you know, individuals who are very astute at being able to do software testing. There's so many different new and, you know, opportunities being opened up. And I would say, you know, you've got to be looking at it and aligning it and finding people who will work with you to help support those dreams. Any questions, comments?
Anybody have a good experience finding employment for their loved one they want to share and how you got there?
Well, my daughter and her boyfriend Matt are here. This is working. But we had a great experience going through Jewish vocational services, where they actually went step by step, interviewed the candidate, find out what their strengths are, what their desires are, and then help them through teaching them how to interview for a job, how to apply on the computer, because no one does anything by hand or paper anymore. And that was the hardest part, even for me as the mother. That frustrated me the most, but they helped her do that, and then went to the interview with her so they could help support her if she got stuck answering any kinds of questions. And then they provided a few days of job coaching. And then if you live in the New Trier Township, the township gives a grant to Lamb's Farm to provide job coaching for our residents with disabilities. So then she got 2 weeks of Lamb's Farm job coaching, and by that point, she got a job at Jewel, Matthew got a job at Mariano's, and they're really the top sort of employers that really embrace our children and young adults and provide the natural supports. Like after like the first week of job coaching, or I would be checking on her, and one time I had to sub in for the job coach, they're like, all right, get out of here, Mom. We got it. We know what to do. You know, we know how to teach our employees. We know how to support them. And they just took off, and it was a really great experience.
I might also add that, you know, listening to that, and I think that actually Ella's doing an amazing job, because she's been helping me out at the store some. But it's also sometimes as our children grow, and I think Dana, to your point earlier, you know, it's not just one and done, because none of us are one and done. And you look at the frequency at which people change positions now or employers, and it's just always listening to what is that desire and being supportive of the fact that it might change. You know, they may have a good job for 5 years, and you know, you kind of go, "Phew, that's done," and then they want to change, and just like all the other kids you have who want to do the same thing. And so I think it's also continuing to be supportive of that growth and embracing that change. Anyone
I do want to say everything was free, and the JVS has a grant, so if your child is not or your young adult is not ready or hesitant, they'll actually, or someone doesn't want to hire them because maybe it's a small business and they're kind of nervous, JVS has a grant that they will pay your child an internship fee to the business. So that kind of incentivizes the business, so it's a mutual benefit. Your child gets an opportunity to work and they get an opportunity to see if this is a good fit for their business.
And we also, we just received a pretty large federal grant to educate parents of young adults with autism about adult services. So we're going to be offering that. It's a 30-hour training that covers SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, Medicare, natural support, Section 8. I can go on and on. And we actually pay families to participate to offset the cost of transportation and childcare or respite care if you need it. I don't have the flyer finalized yet, but my email's on this table sheet. So if you would be interested, you can email me and I can give you the information about the study. We'll be conducting it a few times in the Chicagoland area.
I'll mention a couple other good pieces of news as far as research is going, but I also make sure that you all notice that you do have an evaluation form tonight, and I know you'll have to leave before the rest of you. If we can get your feedback about tonight, what worked, what things you'd like to see more of, what things you'd never want to see again, that'd be very helpful for all of us. So I appreciate you taking the time to fill that out before you leave. But I had the opportunity over the past couple weeks to meet down at Vanderbilt University and learn about this incredible new autism grant. And the focus of what they want to do down there is to do exactly what we're talking about tonight, which is looking at the skills and strengths of individuals on the autism spectrum. And they're actually creating an app such that anybody in the country could engage with the app, have their child tested through the app. The feedback goes to the committee doing the research down at Vanderbilt, and then they can come back with feedback to the family saying, we find these to be the strengths from what we see from your child completing the tasks. These things might be appropriate for you to pursue, and then align that with their goals and interests, and that can really do a pathway to more opportunities. And that's one big grant that just hit. That was for $10 million. And then a week later, MIT received a $30 million grant to do more research and study in the area of Down syndrome, to help families who've got loved ones facing that challenge. What kinds of needs and supports are most appropriate? What kind of vocational opportunities are most appropriate for someone with Down syndrome? So I think what I want to share with you tonight is that 50 years ago, the world looked very different. And there's tons of money pouring into the area to study the different challenges our families are facing. And there's a lot of hope going forward that they'll have even better information 5, 10, 20 years from now than we have today. So what you're doing tonight to get the information where you can find it, keep looking for it. It's going to be out there. Great researchers like Meghan will be publishing their studies from their findings. And even the USED group that you're part of, where there's a collaborative of these top institutions around the country that are collaborating on the research. So it's not just specific to one state, but rather national in focus about what are the needs in our community, who's doing what, and how can we better serve all the families that are represented here tonight.
I have one more question, sorry. This may be a subject for a whole new session. But as we said at the beginning of the session, is our children with disabilities are now outliving us. And we all know that people with disabilities, their needs change over time. You talk about arranging financial resources. Has there been any modeling done to be able to say this is what is needed to support a child, or support, adult perhaps that has a nursing home, needs nursing home care, or any kind of assisted living later in life?
It's a great question. I can tell all of you that That's typically the first question we get from clients who walk in the door, which is, how much will we need for my kid? He has Down syndrome. What's the answer? We're very honest. We don't know. Unfortunately, a number of people in the insurance industry will give you a number because they want to sell you a policy to cover that amount. They'd be hard-pressed to back that up with facts. Because, as we discussed tonight, the pathways change significantly as your loved one ages. What their interests are, what their needs are, what their health condition is going to be, and what the available opportunities are 20, 30 years from now. And we grew up, most of us in this room, reading Dick Tracy, who talked to his watch. And that seemed as far-fetched as anything. Now my kid talks to his watch every day, and that's normal. So what the future holds for our loved ones, I don't know. I know they want to be part of it, and I know I want to help, but as far as putting a number on it, I think the best we can do as families is be smart with our resources, avail ourselves of what's publicly available to support what we can do personally, and then grow the assets as best we can to support our loved one when we're gone. And it's kind of a combination of all those things, but there's no magic bullet number. I wish there was. It'd be a lot easier for me to do my job, but there isn't.
Yeah, it's individual.
Yeah, it's a very individualized question. What each individual family wants for their loved ones is very different too. You could have two people with exactly the same fact pattern for their kid's health and their condition, and the families have very different goals for their loved ones. So it is a very individualized discussion. Other questions tonight? You can go anywhere you want to go now because we've covered all the material.
I'll make one suggestion. As we think about our loved ones, think about what you did to make connections. Our son, the senior at New Trier, did a senior project. He wanted to work at a theater company. So he brought home a list of theater companies' phone numbers, and we got on the phone. And he called and called and called and got shut down until somebody said, "Sure, come on down and talk to us." That individual is still in his life. That was at 18, he's now 33 years old. 34, our son worked as manager on the basketball team in high school. That resulted in him eventually getting a job working at a pizza company as a receptionist, as a host. He has just made connections, and those connections have turned into long-lasting friendships, same as everybody else. So when you think about it, don't limit your loved one to limited expectations, and allow them to go out and try to do things that you never thought they could do.
Rick, that's beautiful. I don't know if we want to finish with that, but maybe we'll edit it out so it does end with that, because I think he's exactly right. If you set high expectations for your loved one and don't assume less and don't accept less from the community, you'll be surprised what you can achieve and what they can achieve. That's a really good point. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, if those of you want to stay and ask more personal questions, you're welcome to. The materials you have here will further the discussion and give you more information, and feel free to hit any of us up with emails after the fact. But we do appreciate your evaluations, and thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.